My name is Craig Wallach. I'm 49 years old. I've been playing video games for close to 40 years now, ever since I was a little kid.
My name is Rick Ozier, 48 years old, and I've been playing video games since I was 5 or 6 years old.
My name is Jeff, and I'm 51 years old. I was playing video games for about 15 years. I don't play video games now. What's stopping me really is time. I don't have a lot of time at all to even bother playing them.
Sydney Lawson, 58, 50 years.
Oh, Lisa Lawson, 53, and oh God, I guess about 40 years.
My first experience with video games came when I was about 8 or 9 years old with the Atari 2600. We bought that for Hanukkah one year. All my brothers had it, and we used it every day, all day, until our parents told us to put it away. We liked playing Pitfall, River Raid, Pac-Man, all of those cool old games like Space Invaders and things like that.
The Atari 2600, where you had a line, and a little pebble, and you bounced them back and forth, back and forth.
Back in the day, probably Atari, Pong. That was the first game. Back then there really wasn't a lot.
So anyways, the game ended up burning the screen of Pong, like the paddle and the ball, burned them into the screen of our TV, and my father flipped out after, because we played it non-stop to the point, just for hours on end, and then it eventually it screwed our TV up. So he was not very happy about that.
Some of the biggest games back then were Pitfall, River Raid, Combat, Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man, Missile Command, Berserk, Space Invaders. Oh, I could go on and on.
The biggest games I remember I used to play all the time, Pac-Man. Pac-Man was my number one. Defender, Asteroids. That was like my generation of pretty much the top games at the arcade.
After that, we went to started with the Nintendo, the NES system, that both my brother and I got really into. Super Mario Brothers had to be like the game that sticks out the most. It was just a great game, and just pretty much every Super Mario Brother game that came out after that. But the first one had to be like the best one, that it bring back a lot of memories.
When I got it, I actually got it at my first sleepover birthday party, so all my friends and I were playing with it first. I had two games at the time, Combat, which was what it came with, and Pac-Man. That was the hottest game at the time.
Okay, well, when we started dating, I had an NES system, Nintendo, and we ended up finding a game that we'd actually play together.
Which was Bubble Bobble.
And we kept challenging ourselves to see how far we could get. And we thought level 99 was the max, and it ended up keep going. So I think we got to what, 104?
Yes,
I think it was
104.
104. We never got past 104. We played that for a couple years.
Absolutely.
When we had time.
And I'm not a video game person at all, but this kept my attention.
After I got the Super Nintendo, and that broke pretty much. It was an old machine. I didn't bother getting any more video consoles. I got my first computer, and it came with a game. The game, if I remember, was called Myst, and it was kind of like a mystery game. I never really could figure out to this day how to even finish that game.
It would have to be Duke Nukem. It was PlayStation, the first PlayStation. They had a game called Duke Nukem that came out, and it was just a mixture of kind of Schwarzenegger, kind of Commando, not Commando, Predator slash Dirty Harry slash, like the developers for the game. I think they took pieces of from different like genre, like movies, and just kind of incorporated them somewhat into the games. And there was probably, I think there was like 4 different Duke Nukems that came out, 4 or 5, and each time they got better and better.
There was actually a dragon that would blow bubbles, and you had a, like, if something came down to attack you, you blow the bubble and you pop the bubble and it would kill them.
And then you get points.
Level 104.
I don't know what the high score number-wise. No idea. But we were a good team with that.
Yeah, we actually did really well.
Probably the only game I think we played together.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Waiting for new games to come out was relatively easy. You looked at circulars. Some people were waiting in line at the video game store for the new releases to come out. The best places to get games were mostly your local computer store or any department store had these video games.
Like GameStop was kind of the hip place to go, but you could go Target, Kmart, Walmart. I mean, a lot of places had pretty good selections of games.
Usually around Christmas time, Thanksgiving, they would start releasing some a teaser trailer on TV or something. Nowadays, you know a new Call of Duty is coming out every November, and you would wait for it, especially when summer came. It wasn't like that back then, that I recall at all. It was you played until you heard the new one was coming out, and then you'd sit with your friends and say what kind of new worlds they were going to build, what kinds of new levels there would be, would there be new characters.
I remember used to go to Child World. It was like a Toys R Us back then. And Woolworths was kind of like a Walmart.
Was it very popular back in the day, or was it kind of an out there store?
Well, everything was at the mall. I lived right next to the mall, so I had everything at my disposal. But those are the main places I remember going for the games at that point.
Nintendo had a magazine, but it was just pretty much just the games that previews of their games that were coming out. The Nintendo magazine that only came out I want to say every couple months, if I recall. I mean, it's been a while. I mean, it took a while. Like, you couldn't really be impatient because the developers, the companies, like, it wasn't like it is today where they have multiple companies or studios turning out games, and the graphic designers and all that. You just had one company that pretty much did it. And
game magazines, there weren't really many game magazines at the time. Until around my Super Nintendo, there were a lot more video games. That's how I found out when most of those games were coming out at the time. Anything that was in the magazines was mostly related to video games, what new releases were coming out. Even some of them had cheat sheets on how to beat those video games. I didn't really have a personal favorite on those magazines.
When I was a kid, I used to go to the Westgate bowling lanes, and they had an arcade there, and I always used to play Space Invader or Galaxia or Defender. There's a whole bunch of different games. I don't think you see a lot of the big games anymore when you go to the arcades. I mean, there used to be full, like, store-like arcades. Where I used to go at the bowling lanes, there was only probably about 10 machines there. So that's why you get so good on certain games, because that's all you have to play.
They were pretty much very dark. Yeah, dark and kind of, dark and dingy, and cigarettes weren't, indoor smoking wasn't banned at that time, so there was a lot of like cigarette smoke. Difference between the arcades now, the arcades now are just a lot cleaner. I haven't really been to an arcade in a while, but the last time I was, they seemed just a lot cleaner and brighter too. Like they actually turned the lights on, I guess.
Arcades, most of the arcades at that time were the same as the video games I already had. So that's another way I found out about most of the games. One of my favorite games on the Atari 2600 was Pole Position. It was the most popular game in the arcade when we were playing that. It was a little different on the Atari 2600 though, because in the arcades you had a steering wheel, whereas on the Atari 2600 you had a joystick controller.
Another piece to the first experiences were the arcades that were around in the 1980s. That's where you played your video games until the home stuff came out. You would go to the arcade, you would go with $3 or $4 in quarters, and you'd play. They had multiplayer games, they had single player games. You could be there for 2 or 3 hours with $7 or $8 and have something to drink and play Tekken with your friends or play Galactica with your friends. It was a different time back then. You would spend a lot of time in an arcade.
Oh yeah.
Especially what it looked like.
Ooh, it's dark. Bright lights. Like the flooring and the decor was dark, but the lights were bright. The machines were going. I mean, we used to do ping pong back in the day. You know.
Air hockey.
Air hockey.
When I was growing up, the graphics were very rudimentary. There was not a lot of detail behind them, especially when you look at old football games, even the old Mario games when you were on Atari 2600, things like Pitfall. It was very blocked. It was very, there wasn't a lot of music behind it. There wasn't a lot of entertainment type stuff behind it. It was but we didn't know any better back then because it was what was out and it's what we played. But if you compare the graphics of an Atari 2600 to the new PlayStation 5, just a Spider-Man game or something, you would be in awe at how much we've grown over the last, call it 30 or 40 years.
They're so far advanced and more like the graphics, I mean the systems, I mean everything is just so, I mean anything in technology, if it's more than 6 months old, it's archaic because everything just, there's a progression. They're just, the developers are just trying to make something to better than what they did before. So
based on the video games today, I noticed, because I watch my nephew play video games now, and I see the graphics on those, and they've come a long way from even the Atari 2600, where you had a line, and a little pebble, and you bounced them back and forth, back and forth. That game was called Pong, and that was before the actual Atari 2600 came out. So looking at the video games now, they're unbelievable compared to what I was playing.
Oh, I like the ones now much more. There's a few in the past, like Super Mario or Mario and Pac-Man, that you always go back to. But the Call of Duties and all the motion games and all that, now you have the VR, and it's just a completely different world now.
I think the graphics are amazing. Like they look real, true to life. Having two boys who
Play on it.
live on it, and also in real life, use weapons because they were in the junior shoot league. Their weapons are true to life. Everything's like really dead on.
It's amazing that the video game industry has exploded the way it has. When it moved from arcades into the home, when like ColecoVision, Atari 2600, when those things really started to come into the home, people I don't think were really sure how it would work because you're playing on a TV, you have a different kind of a controller, your parents are there, are they going to tell you to stop playing? But it's really exploded, and it's probably one of the biggest businesses in the world right now. Every kid, every teenager, every young adult, and most adults have video game systems in their homes, and it's become like what a cable TV is at this point. So it's been amazing to watch.